need to be kind of approved in principle by council. So let's see if I can zoom in. Here we go. Do you guys still see it? Yeah, okay. I'm relying on you, Councillor Windsor. I can see you the best. Okay. So the focus of this year's budget is a couple of things. So maintaining spending efficiency was one of our goals. We have worked really hard in the past several years to look at different contracts and way that we can be more efficient in our spending. We also are seeing what we're calling proactive maintenance. So you will see that we have a considerable increase in our repairs and maintenance budget lines. And that's to start seeing that proactive maintenance rather than reactive, kind of after something's already broken, fix it. We want to maintain it before we get to that state. And then, of course, the big one for us is to get past, or to try to get past, depending on restrictions, the COVID-19 pandemic and get back to normal operations. So the 2021 budget doesn't depict totally normal operations, but compared to 2020, it's a step in the right direction. And when I say that, it is really important, because we're comparing to the 2020 budget, to consider that that was fully revised last May to take into account the effects that we thought that COVID would have on our operation. Okay, so jumping in here, and so the other way that we're also going to show the budget is here. It's what we call by object code. So it's the type of revenue sources for the whole organization and the type of expenses by the whole organization. And do you guys see my mouse moving around when I'm doing that? Yeah, okay, perfect. So that part of it will happen a little bit later on. So what we're presenting here is a 2.06% increase in tax support. So when we're looking, we're actually going to start with the very bottom line here. And this version of the budget is asking for $4,772,317 for tax support. And that's compared with $4,676,174 in 2020. That's an increase of 96,000 approximately, or 2.06%. And now we're going to talk about how we came up with that. So across the different divisions, we're going to see some changes year over year. And I'm going to do a brief kind of overview of each of these right now. And so starting with our revenues, we're seeing, so general municipal revenue. What that is kind of the revenue that is overall all across kind of, it doesn't really fit into a specific department. And we are seeing a significant increase here, 332,332. So that increase is actually because, as you'll see, it's not just franchise fees in that and penalties in that department anymore. It is the excess most grant that's not attributed to any specific department. And in addition, we've also moved our interest revenue, our return on investments, into this department, as it's a more suitable representation that it's general municipal revenue as opposed to before it was in the general government. Councillor Windsor?
Thank you, Amanda. I'm just wondering, you're talking about some things being moved in there. I understand that the most wasn't applicable in 2020, but the interest and stuff was. So is that reflected in the 2021 budget as well, or not? Or the 2020 budget, or not?
No.
Okay, so essentially we can't compare the two necessarily side by side because they're not exactly representing the same thing.
Right, but when we look at the revenue by object code, you'll see investment income or return on investments as a separate line, so you can see exactly what the comparison was there. Yeah.
Thank you.
No problem. So I'm not going to go into detail on every one of these revenue lines. The common theme is that, sorry, Councillor Windsor, did you put your hand up again, or is that the same? Okay, thanks. Into detail on every single line. As you know, there has been like an organizational structure, some changes over the past year, and that does take some time to implement. And so some of what we're seeing in this departmental revenue and expense is that adjustment of getting those to the right place. When we talk about the revenue in the general government, it's a reduction of about 28,000. That's a combination of moving the interest income to general municipal revenue and also a decrease of other things. So we'll get there. Community services, what we are seeing because of COVID is a reduction in the actual programming that that the town is providing. And so we have this programming department, and administratively we are not, so you'll see zeros here in the revenue and in the expense side of things. And so programming itself will no longer be a division or a cost center, but any of those kind of functions have moved into either like the FCSS here. So a lot of the programs we're moving away from offering something that maybe a different organization is offering. And we're only offering the programs that would be covered under the FCSS program, the DOSCA program, or FRN. Under recreation, and again, this is revenues, we do see kind of some different things going on. So within each of these departments, there are going to be, because recreation is the most impacted by COVID, the most grant has been allocated to these departments in different ways. And we can only allocate the most grant up until March 31st, 2021. So what we did here was we looked at revenues for the whole year, taking what we knew up to today, and then figuring out or making assumptions about what services we're going to be able to offer and how well they're going to be utilized for the rest of the year. So, for example, for the pool, it hasn't been opened from January to March 31st. Well, it opens on Monday. So we basically had no revenues there. We are allocating the most grant there for those 3 months for the lost revenues that we expected. And then going forward from April 1st to December 31st, we've made assumptions about when the programming is going to happen. And we're not assuming full operations. So, and we don't have the most grant to cover from April to December. So we are seeing a reduction in revenue there in aquatics because of that. But just to that point, we have also adjusted staffing costs on the expense side of things for the pool, because we also know we won't need a full, we won't need all the lifeguards back for those periods either. It's kind of implemented in steps. The other more significant one here in recreation for revenue is the memorial complex. So typically where we don't have revenues, we are bringing in, again, some of the most grant to, which we've talked about, which will actually be put into the capital reserve and then used to fund the skate park project. And then looking at the campground, we are projecting a little bit higher revenues this year, just because camping is extremely popular right now, and we're going to be open for a full season. So moving along, so protective services is kind of where we're going to go next. Well, so again, it's the 2020 budget, the 2021 budget's in yellow, and then the change is over here. So we are seeing a bit of a decline here in protective services revenue overall. That is mainly because of the fines. So the impact of, it's a little bit the impact of COVID has actually, because nothing was really happening, there's a delay in when a fine is charged to somebody and when they'll pay it. Typically, they might wait for it to go to court or things like that. So it does take long. It's not paid right away. So what we see is things that were charged. If somebody got a fine last March or April, they might not be paying it until now. So we were quite slow in ticketing during the first few months of COVID, especially because nobody was out there. There was nobody driving places to get a speeding ticket. We saw our downtown was empty. The highway was not busy at the normal time. People weren't, the school was closed. So, they weren't in the playground zone or going through a stop sign. So that is trickling into 2021 in the collection of the revenue. And in addition, we are down to one CPO officer. So that also impacts the CPO that we have cannot write traffic tickets, which are the ones that generate more revenue. And so our CPO2 is enforces bylaws mostly, which our first step in enforcement isn't ticketing. It's usually to get them to comply. So tickets are a lot less common in that kind of division of municipal service or municipal enforcement. Moving into planning and development revenues. So we're going to take a look first at the subdivision line. Now that is our Chance subdivision. And you'll see, so it pays for itself. It doesn't have an impact on taxes. The revenues always equal the expenses. And what you'll see here is a reduction of 150. This is just the way we're budgeting. We don't expect, we're not planning for the land sale. So we've reduced kind of the cost of the land here, but when we go down to the expenses, the exact same thing happened. So it's a net zero effect. So it looks like a lot here, but it's not. It's a net zero on the budget. And with the planning and development department, so there's most grant allocated here as well because of the development permit program that council approved in December. And we're also seeing a slight reduction. So we went the way we're budgeting this revenue now is a 5-year average. So that is what's driving this total here, the 58,000. We do look at what we expect to see, but on this type of revenue, a 5-year average is a really good indication of where you're going to be at as well. And then with this economic development one, so we're budgeting 45,000, and that is business licenses. Previously, there was a grant offered by the county for $5,000 for tourism. They're no longer offering that, which is why you see this reduction of $5,000 on that line. For public works, we see a slight reduction as well in revenue, 7,000. Last year we had, so our bulk water station is the majority of that revenue in roads and streets, sorry. Last year we had a contract where, not a contract, but there was a business using it a lot. So we generated a whole bunch of water in the first few months of 2020. And we're not expecting that same uptake this year. So we've just adjusted for that, which is the $7,000 decrease. And then with the cemetery, we're also expecting a reduction in the revenues. And this is because the way we're budgeting here for this revenue is the 5-year average again. So because we can't specifically plan for what's to come in terms of revenue, a 5-year average is a really good indication for that type of revenue. And then finally, our utilities department, which we know is self-supported. And so what that means for budget purposes is that these numbers will equal the expenses. And we're seeing overall a $167,883 increase. And that's about what is that number? Where did my notes go? That's about a 5% increase over last year overall, but it's split into our 3 utility departments. So water, wastewater, and solid waste. What we're seeing, I'm going to start with the solid waste. And which we see a 20,000 reduction. We're super happy about that. The RFP that just went out for waste services, actually, we were able to secure a lower cost per service. So that's why we're seeing that decrease there in revenues. And then with the water department, we see quite a big increase. And the wastewater, we're seeing quite a big decrease. I don't want you to be alarmed about that. What we're doing, and we've talked about it to council before, is we're saving for the reservoir project by reducing the transfer to the wastewater reserves. So most of this reduction in wastewater is because the reserve that we typically saw in 2020 is no longer going to happen. So we're doing a $100,000 reserve, which we'll explain later, reserve transfer, and that's kind of for the common repairs and maintenance that we might see. But we're not doing kind of that large infrastructure reserve. So we're postponing that in the wastewater department for a couple of years. And in the water utility, now we're adding to the reserve there, and it's 500,000. So there is an increase above that, but most of that is the reserve transfer specifically for saving for the reservoir. Okay, so that's revenues, kind of high level. I'm going to pause. Is there any questions so far? Mayor Hunter, what? Yeah.
Yeah. I have it right here, just a minute. A couple questions. Why aren't we planning for a Shant's land sale? Just out of That's one question.
That's really just like the administrative way to account for that. And so whether we budget for that, like the 150,000 that was being budgeted it was kind of just like historically how it was budgeted, but that didn't reflect like the land that was going to sale or that sold that year. So each piece of land that sells has a cost.
Okay, and
so yeah, the way I said it, I was trying to simplify it. There may be a land sale, but the 150 didn't accurately represent that, I guess.
Okay, and then business licenses. So you budgeted 45. I would expect some of that is probably the most grant in there.
Yes.
Is there a breakdown? Like, should we? I mean, some of the thoughts too are we going to even charge a business license fee for this year? I mean, that's on my mind as we go forward. But that would also depend. I mean, a business license fee for our 260 home and storefronts businesses. Has that encompassed all that? Have they all received theirs? And then that's just it's accounted for in the most grant. Is that
yes? Well, good? So the uptake. So the program is essentially over. It is the end of March, but so 40 of the 45,000, about 44,000 is the most grant.
Okay.
And then we've planned for, sometimes we see trickling in of business licenses later in the year. So, yeah. So 1,000 would cover.
Okay.
Like up to like 10 business licenses that might come in.
We pretty much distributed all the licenses that we had on file for those that are historical with us.
Yes.
Okay. That's good for now, and I have other ones, but I'll ask.
Okay. Are there any other questions at this point? Okay. So then looking at our expenses, we're just gonna kind of start at the top and move down again. So for council and election, so typically this is just called council. We've also added the election costs onto this line here. So the majority of the change in the budget for the council is election costs for this year, because of course we have the election coming up. And then because we'll have a new council up, we're also going to have to equip them with devices, so like either a laptop or whatever it might be. So the other part of this increase is because there will be new councillors potentially after the election. So nothing in the council budget is really different. It's all impacted by the election. The general government expenditures, I'm gonna have to come back to that one. I don't have my notes on that right now. I'll have to just look quickly at that. So for community services, there is a reduction in expenditures. Again, the programming line here is eliminated, so we're seeing 0. And we did move those. It was mostly employee costs in there, which are allocated to various departments. Part of it's FCSS, which is why you see the increase here. The other part of it was communications. So we're going to see an increase to the communications line as well. For recreation, again, highly impacted by COVID. The way we budgeted for revenues is the same way we budgeted for expenses. So we sat down with the department and made a plan of when these services, and we assumed when they would start operating again. So just like with the pool where we saw the revenues reduced, we're also seeing a reduction in the aquatics because of, if we're only open, 10:30 to 6:30, Monday to Friday for a number of months, we don't actually need all of the lifeguards recalled back. So that has a big impact on the expenses here. Kind of in general, there's no real big change with the recreation as far as any special kind of programs that we're looking to fund. It is mostly just the impact of COVID compared from 2020 to 2021. And those are the changes here that we're seeing. For the parks department, that's one I do want to point out. So this 22,000. With the change last year of parks going from public works into parks, we kept the tree money. So we do tree maintenance, removal, pruning, etc. That money was all in public works last year. So it's still in the 2020 comparison for public works, the tree maintenance budget. It is now moved into parks. So parks kind of controls that budget now. And it's a parks function is what we've determined, not a public works function. So this increase of the 22,000 is largely because we're adding to this budget line, we're adding tree maintenance, which came out of public works or the roads and streets line. And then this memorial complex looks high as well. So there are wages allocated differently. So looking at our organizational structure, we have changed the way certain people are allocated. And this impacts partially the memorial complex, but also arena, because one individual is more managing all of the recreation departments at this point. And so that's also part of the reason why this aquatics was reduced. But the other thing with the memorial complex, so that is actually kind of a hub cost center for us. So there's things at the complex administratively that we charge there, like photocopying. They have one photocopier. We are putting those costs here in the complex, where previously we saw them in the arena, which didn't really make sense. The arena is its own cost center, and we didn't want to confuse those expenses. So moving down to communications. So here we see about an $84,000 increase, and that is, we are looking to add capacity with our communications and marketing department. And so that's the increase that we're seeing here. And the culture, which would include museum, library, and our other community facilities, which is mainly the 5-0 clubs, the 2 buildings. So we're seeing a reduction, and this has to do with the per capita library amount that was set by council. Moving on to protective services. So the main increase in expense here is with the RCMP. So that's, again, that municipal policing service contract. We're paying for 12 months of it. In 2020, we were only paying for 9 months of it. And so that's why we have this increase of $64,000. And with municipal enforcement, it has not changed at this point. But we are going to be talking to council about the level of service. So once that discussion is had, we will likely see an impact to that department, that budget right there for municipal enforcement. Moving to planning and development. So this is planning and economic development. Planning and development is pretty stable year over year. Economic development, we're seeing an increase. So last year we had an economic development officer only for part of the year. And this year we're expecting it for the full 12 months, which is why there's an increase there on this line for economic development. And we've also accounted for $5,000 in that budget line on top of 2020's amount for the Christmas light program that was an initiative last year. So there is $5,000 here in economic development, specifically for that Christmas light program. In 2020, we didn't actually budget for that. We took it from a different budget line, which is why there's an increase. We took it from what was called the Economic Development Committee budget line. So in 2021, we have both those. We have money for Economic Development Committee, and we have $5,000 for Christmas lights. For public works, again, the focus here, as you heard Craig talk about, was a lot of maintenance activities, infrastructure maintenance. So we're seeing an increase overall in both departments. The cemetery amount, this $13,000, that's mainly attributed to what Craig described as the maintenance that he wants to do in the cemetery. And then in the roads and streets line, we talked about the infrastructure projects like the trails repairs. So there's an increase in the trails R&M money of $35,000. And then the increase of the roads R&M budget. So we talked about the so last year for the road rehab program, we had about a $188,000 investment. And this year we have $210,000 in that line currently as it stands. And that'll be discussed with council too as to what that investment looks like. And then looking at the utilities departments, when we described like the revenues of those departments, that largely explained the differences here in the expenses as well, because it's the expenses that drive the revenues. So we are seeing a couple of other things besides the reserve transfers. In the wastewater, Craig talked about the desludging of the lower lagoon. And So there is about 30,000 added to the repairs and maintenance in the wastewater utility to complete that project. And in the water utility, he's also budgeted for the Butte maintenance project as well. And the solid waste utilities, so I did talk about our reduction with our provider, the contractor, but there was also a reduction at our municipal portion that we pay to the Waste Commission. And then we have our contingency, and we've at this point left it at 50,000, same as last year. And that wraps up our operating expenditures. Overall, there's about a 3.3% increase. So when you look at your total expenditures, they were 11.5 million in 2020, and we're proposing 11.9 million in 2021. So that wraps up the revenue and expenses by division. Were there any expense lines specifically that Councillor Windsor?
Thank you, Amanda. You talked to, when you were doing the line on communications and marketing, you talked about increasing capacity. What exactly are you talking about for increased capacity?
So that would be additional manpower added to that department.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Mayor Hunter?
A few questions. The FCSS budget expense, what's the ratio of staff versus program? So there's, FCSS funding is given to us so we can distribute it to our community. So what percentage are we distributing and what percentage is allocated to staff?
Great question. Well, I'm going to have to bring that back to get you an accurate answer.
Okay, and why, can you explain the increase in salaries and wages overall of $96,000?
Where was that?
Well, it's on the, or are you going to the next sheet?
Yeah,
are you
I
go
will.
To the sheet? Okay.
We'll do the next sheet. Yeah.
I'll ask again.
Yeah, we'll be speaking to the key takeaways overall. At this point, we're just, if you have any questions, just regards to by division.
Yeah, revenue expense. And there was a comment you made that I missed about, I'll find it here. Oh, I'm going to ask this first. The economic development lines. So the Economic Development Advisory Committee has some money allocated for training, education, seminars, whatever.
Yes.
In there?
Yes.
And is there the Garland project in there too? Again? Like that we pay for the company to hang the garland downtown?
Yes, we've always taken that from the economic development line. And
that's
so
included in there?
It's not added, but it's it would be expected that it's the same as the prior year. And that's part of the 5,000 for the ECDEV committee. Let me just find that quickly. Yes. So there's 5,000 for the ECDEV committee, and you're right, we take money from there to pay for the garland.
From the 5,000 or on plus 2,500?
No. So 5,000 total, and out of the 5,000 comes the garland money.
Okay.
Yeah. But then there's another 5,000 added in 2021, specifically for Christmas lights.
Oh. Okay. And I'm just going to go to back to the utility, water utility I missed some of that. Would you mind just going
Sure.
through that 602,000 increase?
Yeah.
I was writing and I can't do both, write and pay attention.
Oh no, if ever you need me to slow down, please just
No,
stop me.
that's okay.
So we talked about, we've increased the transfer to reserves for the water utility. So 500,000 of that 602 is the transfer to reserve to save for the water reservoir project.
So are we then, is that implying that there'll be an increase in fees for our citizens, our users of water?
That would imply that, yes.
That's what you'll be presenting?
Yes, we will talk about the fees at a later date.
Okay.
But yes, that is what it means if you're using the water utility, that you're going to have a higher, and it's a fixed fee because it relates to the reserve transfer. So there would be a higher fixed fee across all the users, which would be offset by a lower fee for wastewater utility.
Right. And tell me if you can, RCMP $789,000. That's not our contract. Obviously,
No.
our contract. So what does that encompass?
So
Besides
that division is largely the contract. It's one administrative position, and it's the facility maintenance. So the building, the RCMP building, is owned by the town, and all the costs to operate that, which is repairs and maintenance, natural gas, water, electricity, all of that, and reserve transfers.
And we're at about what, 400,000 for RCMP contract? Close to?
We are.
Yeah.
It's more, I believe. Let me look. Sorry, 1 second.
Yeah.
527,000.
Wow. But we get a grant too. I mean, there's revenue there, right?
Yeah, well, a bit. Our costs go up, the grant stays the same.
Right. And can I ask, communication, an $84,000 increase in communication is a pretty big hit. And I know last year we implemented the communication line because of the amount of communication that was going, that from all departments went into communication, but $84,000 more, what would that cover?
Well, there's a couple of things. So in the past where we had, so one of our employees who's mainly communications was allocated to programming, programming department. So now that's brought back into the general communications department. And as well, like I said earlier, is it would be increased manpower, which we'll talk about further when we talk about wages and salaries for the organization.
Okay. And then I'm sorry too, there's one other question that is,
it's fine.
Municipal enforcement.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't catch the last thing you said. Like we're included in that right now is a CPO 1 and 2.
This is, yes.
Okay.
And a 0.25 of an admin position, which we brought in last year.
Okay.
Yeah. So for the full year. So we know there's going to be a change there. We haven't even adjusted for not having a CPO one thus far.
Okay, good. That's the questions I have for now. Thank you.
Thanks. Councillor Moore?
Yes, I'm thinking that this might be a good news thing. You said that there was a 3.3% increase, and your sheet says that there's a 2.06. And so I checked it, and that is, I'm hoping that that is the correct amount over last year on the very bottom line of tax support on the expenditure sheet.
Yeah, so the 2.06 increase is for tax support. But when we're looking at the operating expenses, so do you see my screen still?
Yes.
The bottom line in black says total operating expenditures. That is where we're seeing a 3.3% increase.
Oh, okay. Because there was 3.3 on the previous year. I thought, so those are the same.
Oh, that's just a coincidence.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you. And it's great to see that the tax support is only 2.06% higher, because I think a lot of people focus on that. But you guys do a great job. I just want to reference that we were second from the bottom on the Canadian Taxpayers Federation analysis of towns in our range. And I think that that's important to say, that we are very frugal. And thank you for all the work you did on that.
Thanks, Councillor Moore. Are there any other questions at this point? Okay. So lastly, the way we're going to present it, because what we just showed you is important and valuable, but it's also important to see kind of where we're spending the money across the entire organization. So we're going to show you the revenue sources by type of revenue, and we're going to show you the expense types as well. So I don't know if anyone else needs a little stretch, but you'll see me wiggling a lot. Okay, so the revenue sources include things like municipal taxation, grants, user fees, franchise fees, investment income, licenses and permits. These are all the types of revenues that the town brings in each year. And I'm not going to actually spend a ton of time on this part, because we do have in our slides some more information on this. So I think what I'm going to do, because we've talked about the general numbers, is just move back into our slideshow at this point.
Yeah. So, and we'll highlight kind of the key takeaways of the big numbers of the overall picture, and we'll highlight some kind of what the key takeaways from the overall numbers are.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so we're going to start kind of at the top and go through some significant lines that have been significantly changed year over year. So we've already talked about the net municipal taxation, which is that 2.06% increase from the prior year. And so we're going to go on to the second line, which is operating grants. And especially this year, a lot of things with grants have changed. So that's why we're highlighting this. We're going to look, you can all see my screen. We have 2020 actual and 2020 budget and 2021 budget, and then the change. So our MSI operating grant is $170,000 for 2021. And that's an increase over last year of $12,000. Our municipal policing grant is going to be a $60,000 increase over last year. So that's $242,144. And that is, the change there is because of the timing. So again, 12 months of the grant versus last year was 9 months of the grant. Now, new for 2021 is the ACP internship grant money. We were approved, it's a $43,000 grant, $43,000 grant, but it's over kind of 2 years. So this year's $28,000 would cover May to December, and then next year we'll bring in the grant for January to April. And sorry, these are provincial grants that we're talking about now. So social services, this is when we're looking at grants for DOSCA, FCSS. So provincially, we're looking, it's really pretty much maintained from the prior year for the budget purposes. And then with the most grant, this is where we see the biggest increase is $538,000. So across all those budget lines, we're bringing in the most grant, which is our full allocation of $538,000. And we'll talk about this more in detail about the allocation of that. And the most grant, of course, can be used on lost revenues related to COVID. And then our other grants come from the Mountain View County. So we split them into shared services and social services. And the shared services, we're seeing a 0.8% increase. We're expecting a COLA or CPI, they call it, sorry. Increase of 0.8% from the county. So that's a little increase there. And then for social services, that's basically the funding that we receive for our FCSS from the county. So overall, with this budget line, $641,000 increase. And again, most of that is because of the most grant. So moving on to sales and user fees, we're seeing a sharp decrease, $272,000 over last year in what we budgeted for that. And most of that is the recreation, not most of it, but a lot of it is from recreation. So this I've split out by the department that generates those revenues. And so here's where I'm looking, recreation. And 159,000 here is a decrease over last year. And when we looked at recreation revenues in total, they didn't decrease that much. That's because the most grant is supplementing some of that lost sales and user fees. The other part here, which is an increase in the opposite direction, is utilities. That's our water, wastewater, and solid waste. So an increase of 119,000, which is a 4.1% increase. So at a high level, a user that uses all three of those services would see a 4.1% increase to user fees over compared to 2020. So now, like a lot of the other revenues are fairly consistent year over year. So we're going to move into the types of expenses. And starting off with salaries and wages, we're going to show you here a graph of what the budget has been for the past several years. So a 5-year, we have 5 years here. So 2017, 18, 19, 20, 21. And as you can see, our expense, although it is higher than last year, so of It's an increase of 166,000 that we're proposing, but it is only slightly higher than our 2018 salary and wages.
And one thing, and this is a good snapshot to kind of see it in terms of a 5-year spread. One thing to keep in mind as we review and discuss the budget overall is that 2020 itself was a very special kind of year, a unique year due to the unique factors that were happening all around, and it resulted in all kinds of impacts on town operations, which led to kind of a very just special, unique type of year for spending. And that's why you saw that kind of drastic decrease there. And so it's important to look at overall, and to keep in mind as part of the overall picture for all of these things is we're coming out of that kind of unique world and going back to kind of hopefully more of a more normalized operation. One of the things, as noted by Councillor Moore earlier, there was a study that came out that showed Didsbury's the Alberta Taxpayers Federation study on all municipal operations that had Didsbury at the very bottom by way of leanest, in the sense that we're on the extreme low end of operational capacity and so which again it's a tough way to do operations when you're extremely on that low end. And so some of this is looking to correct some of that and enhance a little bit of that capacity, so we're not so on that, to be able to accomplish more effective our operations. And so again, you want to look at this in terms of the past 5 years, and some of this to note. Part of this will be there's three components here that's captured here. There's a robustness of our economic development framework that we'll be working on improving this year, and professionalizing our economic development framework. That's part of this. Another part of it is our municipal intern that we've added to our organization for this year. Because this won't be showing, because it'll be shown in another place that some of those costs are offset. Most of that intern's costs are offset by money from the province to fund it. However, the expenditure side is captured here fully as well, because that's not showing the revenues that offset that. And then the other part of that is a previous hole that was created. Some of this that wasn't filled. There was some admin support there in community services that we're looking at wanting to repurpose to enhance our communications capacity, and repurpose some of that hole that wasn't refilled previously. It's still there, but we have a plan to repurpose that. That accounts for some of that communications change in the accounting there, to move that to communications out of, because we've done some other things structurally to lessen the need for that admin support that hadn't been filled from a previous hole that was created, and so we're repurposing there. So that helps to explain that captures that change in the salaries and wages.
Thanks, Ethan. So the next line that we want to take a look at is our professional development. And again, we're looking at a 5-year trend here. And you'll remember in 2020, we adjusted professional development for the impacts of in-person kind of training and conferences weren't happening. And we've maintained that for 2021 as well.
And I will just speak a bit to this as well. Oh, and I did want to also mention just about the salaries and wages too, because we are still coming out of that pandemic, hopefully moving to more normalized, but however, being the unique circumstances that we're in, I did want to note that administratively, we aren't doing any, so we put a halt across the board on all. We're not doing any performance increases to wages. We're not doing any cost of living increases, none of that. So just so that you know that we haven't, that reflection of salaries and wages is not including any performance increases or cost of living increases. We've kept that a freeze on that. And then just speaking to professional development, as you can see, and it's noted there, and you see kind of that what we've done for this year, again, because of the unique circumstances that we're in and the new way that we're doing some of this professional development, but we have pulled back from a lot of the conferences, especially for our staff and those kind of things, that we're focusing our professional development on certifications and recertifications and kind of more of those concrete things that enables our specialists to be able to do what they do. So that's a note on that, and why you've seen that direction. We've really scaled back, again, due to the unique circumstances we're in as we're working to come out of this pandemic, but we still have a lot of those constraints. And so we are very focusing that planning for professional development and kind of raising the bar as to being very choosy as to what we send our people to.
Thanks, Ethan. So moving on, one of the focuses I said earlier was proactive maintenance. So I wanted to highlight the repairs and maintenance line. You'll see it's an increase overall of 135,000 approximately. This is a breakdown of where that maintenance is happening or planned to happen. So the building repairs and maintenance would be increasing 41,500. Vehicles repair and maintenance, there's an increase there of 21,500. Oh, I have a little error on my slide. Utility infrastructure is an increase of 30,000. The road rehab budget overall is about 7,500. But within that 250,000, we're seeing 210 of that would be the road maintenance, and then 40,000 of that is kind of our general annual maintenance, like potholing and crack filling. In 2020, on that line, we actually had $14,000 for street sweeping contracting, which this year there's been improvements to the street sweeper. So we're planning on doing that all in-house. So that 14,000 for street sweeping doesn't exist in this year's budget. And then sidewalk R&M, we've maintained at 80,000. And the trails R&M, we had 5,000 in our budget last year, and we're looking for 40,000. Our debt service here is, so this is, debt service is principal payments and interest payments on our long-term debt. And this is always important to know whether we're planning on taking out any more loans or not. So no, we're not. All we're looking to do is pay off the loans we currently have. So principal would be increasing by about 35,000 over last year, whereas interest would decrease by the same amount, because as you pay off your loan over time, more goes to your principal payment and less goes to interest. There's no new debt budgeted for 2021, that should say. And we're actually taking advantage of lower interest rates. So any of our loans that are not fixed, so our loans with the Mountain View Financial, it'll be quicker to pay them off because the interest rates are so low right now, which is a good thing. And then our contingency. So although there's not a, actually I just noticed these slides are out of order. Here, we'll talk about the reserve transfers first. So you'll see the line called transfer to reserves. And it's important to know these are basically savings, right, for our future infrastructure or future operations and capital, depending on what it is. So I broke out there kind of what we're saving for by each division or department. So the big changes here is we're seeing a little bit. What did I do here? Sorry, somebody is outside honking. Okay, so we're seeing an increase to the community services capital, and we talked about how we're recognizing some of the most grant for lost revenue and in the donations for the skate park project, but we're reserving that to spend on the project. So it is coming into reserves, but it'll likely go out this year as the capital project as well. We're seeing a little bit of a decrease in the capital reserve for protective services, 6,400. What we're seeing at the municipal enforcement level is that we're good for reserves. We would just have the vehicles, the CPO vehicles that we're saving for, and we've reduced the amount going into that. We kind of had topped it up for a couple of years. We don't need to do that anymore based on when the expected trade-in would happen or new vehicle purchase. And then the protective services operating grant, the $68,753 is a decrease. This is fully for the RCMP operating reserve. So what we've talked about a couple of times already, where we save for the next year's expenses. And then in public works, we have a $45,000 decrease. And you'll remember when council approved the greater lease, it was to come out of that year's to also reduce the reserve transfer to offset it. So that's what that's doing. And then in utilities for capital, we're actually just increasing the reserve a bit overall. So we've topped up what's going into the, we had 455,000. Is that math right? Oh yeah, okay, so 455,000 was going into wastewater reserves in 2020. And we aren't doing that in 2021, but we're putting 500,000 into water reserves. And we've also eliminated the reserve transfer for solid waste because that reserve has met its recommended level as well. And then, so now we get back to the contingency. So yes, we've budgeted 50,000 year over year. No change there. But I did want to give you a snapshot of the last 5 years of what that looked like, just for your information. It has ranged anywhere from about 25,000 to 125,000. And then I think, yes, that's the end of that. Oh, part of my presentation. So at this point, I will, if there's questions on that part, I think we'll take them now, and then we're almost ready to end here. Any questions on those slides? Mayor Hunter?
I just want to go back to the water, wastewater. And so when we're talking about, you're mentioning an increase in water rates to our users and a decrease in wastewater. And is that going to be pretty much a wash? Like even that it'll be a zero outcome that they pay this much more, but that much less, so they're not out anything?
No. No. So there is a slightly higher increase. It wasn't just like a transfer of the exact amount between departments. So I think it's, let me see. So what the budget is showing would be $188,000 increase if you combine those two, water and wastewater, which if that's in a percentage, that is about 7%. So we have to look at the way for council to have an impact on those fees is to look at the budget at this point. Now, for anyone who had like a solid waste utility as well, not only are we seeing a reduction, but we're also proposing bringing in reserves to offset the cost. And so when you look at that overall, it makes for only like a slight increase to your total utility bill, but that's only for those who use water, wastewater, and solid waste. So for businesses who we don't provide solid waste services to, they wouldn't see that reduction in solid waste services.
The reason I'm asking this too, I mean, obviously I'm interested in what impact that'll be, but we're putting a proposed 500,000 away for the reservoir, but we're also going to have a debenture on it at the time when it comes. And I know you won't know this answer now, but my thinking is it that important to put that money in reserves and create that increase to our residents and users? And would a debenture do the same thing over the long term as a full debenture? And I don't think you have to answer that right now, but I'm just thinking that way, that my thoughts, and maybe that's an answer that could come back, that, what if we reduce that reserve transfer, the debentures a bit more? How will that, what's the difference in what each person would pay towards the debenture versus towards this reserve and the impact here? And I might not be making sense, and I can talk to you about that a little bit more if you want another day to clarify it. And I have one more question, is that, are we putting, in the survey that the residents did, roads are really, we all drive on the roads, and we know how bad some of our roads are. And the emphasis on the survey was investment in our roads. So have we put enough towards our roads this year for the service level that people are after, according to that survey? And I'm just going to throw out there, we just received information that we're getting more GTF, double our GTF this year. So I'd like to have that conversation too about have we invested enough in our roads, and the GTF might be a good resolution to that for council to consider putting
Yes.
more money into our roads this year. So
Yes.
those are the comments I have, and I'd like to throw that out there for both of those for consideration.
Yeah, for the utility.
Yeah, especially with the roads. I was just going to say, especially with the roads, we've identified that as one of the areas that we'll be raising with council for council to give some thought as to what they want to do with that, because that is something that has been communicated through the from the
loud and clear,
about wanting to improve.
And we drive on them too, so we agree.
Yeah. Yes, and that's so that is something at the top of our list that we really want to have, that we want council to really consider. Is there what level of service you want to reach on that, because that is one of the things on our list that that we want council to really think about what level of that do they want to tackle for this year.
Okay, so my hand's down, and thank you for those answers.
And of course, with the utility question, that's definitely something we'd have to take away and calculate the impact of that. But I do understand what you're getting at. Councillor Windsor.
Thank you, Amanda. I just would like you to go back, if you would, please, to the protective services and the reduction in the reserve that you identified there. I think it was 78,000, if I remember from that slide. And can you tell me again exactly what that reduction represents?
Yes. So you may remember a couple of years ago. Do you want to see the slide?
I'm okay not seeing it. That doesn't make any difference. Okay.
So when we first started planning for the RCMP transition, council made the point to say that they wanted to always be a year. We would always pay for the next year in this year's budget. So in 2019, we paid for what 2020's expenses would be. And in 2020, we paid for what 2021's expenses would be. And so that's what we're doing there. You'll see we had a higher expense in the service cost and a lower expense here in the reserve transfer for 2021.
So then are we still doing that principle where we are preparing for the year ahead, that we are still putting next 2022's expected expenses in reserves for the RCMP?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Councillor Baswick.
Thank you, Amanda. Before anything, this is so well done and so well explained. I really appreciate what the effort that the administration's done on this presentation. From my point of view, made it very easy for me to follow along and understand. So thank you for that. The other thing I have is that are we prepared for? It's a possibility that the Water Commission may be looking forward to increasing the rate to each municipality. There's been no discussion as to what amount. It's just kind of been batted about that the provincial government is, in their wisdom, has directed that to look forward to a possible increase. And we really don't know what that might be. And it's hard to budget on that regard if you don't know what the number is. But it could be somewhat substantial, especially if they go into this Glenifer Lake program, which is going to change the resource of the water supply from the Red Deer River from Glenifer. So although that might be, it could be 2 years, a year, 5 years down the road, I don't know. But I guess what I'm trying to do is prepare you for a potential interim increase in the water rate. So I guess I'll just lay that on you when it arrives. Just a heads up.
At this point, We've only accounted for what we know, which is the increase on April 1st. Mayor Hunter?
I just had, sorry, library includes, can you just explain the expense library? So there's $244,000 in there according to our per capita amount that we set. And what other items are encompassed in that? So is there any money allocated in there towards the expansion project and any, costs that are coming out of our, engineering, RFPs, et cetera? So just the library line expense, 244, that we know what it is, but the other.
Yeah, because there's 303 altogether. So
Yeah.
244 is the municipal appropriation to the library. 45,000 is to pay the parkland membership fees.
Okay, so that makes sense.
We do have the professionals, some money in R&M and professional services as well.
Okay. And then I just want to throw it out there too with council. We've helped with business licenses and animal licenses, and at the town hall we did hear from one of the user groups, but I think it was echoed or lots of nods about it. When are we going to? We decreased user rates at our arena, and I'm throwing it out there to consider that for any group activity. So we decreased the arena ice fee by 25% last year. That couldn't be taken advantage of by our groups because of just the pandemic. And so the ask at the town hall was, can we, consider the rates in our budget discussion so that we can help our groups recover and get back on their feet as the youth groups, especially the youth groups that are going to maybe see a decrease in usership just because of the absences, because of the loss of interest. They haven't been able to fundraise. There's going to be a lot of costs that used to be covered by fundraising. So now it's going to be reflected in what they're going to have to charge their youth to participate. So I'd like to just, have that discussion too and put it in council's head I really thought that was a great suggestion, and we'd already done it by 25%. So I don't know why we wouldn't carry that on for another season and encompass all of our groups like ball and soccer and whoever uses our facilities. So I just want to put that out there right now. And I think that's some outcome of the town hall for our youth groups that we could consider. And I know it's going to affect that revenue line, but there's the ask to council for that consideration. And that's all I have, putting it out there. I don't need an answer right now.
Thank you.
Oh, sorry.
I was just going to say, is there any other questions on the draft budget overview? That does bring us to the end of our sorry, Councillor Moore, were you coming on to ask? Okay, that does bring us to the end of our public budget presentation. We're grateful to the members of the public that were able to attend and watch that. We welcome any of them that would like to submit any comments or questions about the presentation to contact Legislative Services. They can either call Luanna Smith at the office during the week or email her at legislative@didsbury.ca, and we will gather and compile all those comments and make sure those are made available to the council as we go through the next number of weeks through this process. Mayor, you have a thought?
Well, I want you to finish first, and I just want to go after you.
Yeah, sure. So again, thank you to the public that are able to attend. And again, like I said, we'll welcome any impact or inputs or questions that they might want to submit. And then I'll hand it over to the mayor to close off this public budget meeting.
You meant input that could be impactful. That's, you're just getting your words mixed there, right?
Yeah, yeah. I was melding the two.
Yeah, I want to thank. I said I'd thank at the end because we could be thanking everybody all day, and which we should have and we can. But thanks so much to the administrative team for this excellent presentation. And we all know it's a proposed budget. It's draft. It says clearly across there. Thank you for all the work you've done on it, the consideration you put into it, and being mindful of it's still a pandemic year, and people are still in economic recovery, as is our province. And so thank you for that, and thanks for everyone for sitting in, our public who have that interest in our operations and how we decide operational budgets. So, administrative team, much applause. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.